Well, look, I think Australia lags well behind the rest of the world in loss prevention. We know that, obviously, as an industry, we know that retail loses money through theft and through card fraud. There's a whole lot of reasons why retailers lose money. I don't think we're at the same point as we would say our American counterparts or maybe our European counterparts. So I think there's a long way to go, and I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from our overseas retailers as we move forward to ensure that our loss prevention and the theft that happens within our retail stores, our compromise of data, all those kind of issues are addressed as we move forward. Well, let me give you a really good example about that. Now, in the US, there has been a great compromise of data by one of the Target stores there. So if you don't invest in the right processes, if you don't invest in the right equipment, if you don't have all of the checks and balances in place, then you can obviously have a compromise of a whole lot of things. It could be information, it could be a database, it could be card security, it could be credit card numbers, it could be any amount of issues that you have. Now, that's the first part of the issue, that you actually might have a compromise and that someone steals the data. The second problem is, depending upon where your data is, what data is stolen, you may end up in a position whereby you could get a fine from someone like a Visa or a MasterCard or a similar type organisation or a bank. So there are a whole lot of risk issues if you don't have the right set of rules and the right amount of the right amount of processes in place to ensure that your data is, and your theft is protected. Well, look, obviously the payment industry is changing very quickly. We know that there's some trials being done at the moment on mobile telephones. We know that the speed at which the processes are moving in relation to payments. The payments we're using today, as an example, tap and go on a card, may not be there in the next couple of years. We might have moved to a mobile phone and using mobile phone technology. It might be fingerprint, it could be using an iris of your eye. There's a whole swag of ways in which that can of which we can move forward in ensuring that we have the right processes and everything in place. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done. I think that there's a lot of things that we need to be looking at, and we need to make sure that as we move forward we've got the very best in place, be it whether we're going to use mobile technology, whether we're going to use some other kind of technology. We've got to make sure those processes are in place. Well, first, if we talk about just retail theft, and I'm excluding all other types of data theft or compromise on cards, if we just talk about goods that we've got in the store, the industry is responsible for about $285 billion worth of sales. Now, we know that retail theft is around 3%. Now, obviously it's going to depend upon what kind of industry you're in as to what that 3% is, or whether that 3% is 3% or whether it's more or less. So if you convert that 3%, it is approximately $7.5 billion worth of stock or goods that are removed. Some of that will be by consumers, some of that theft will be totally by in-house staff. So we've got to identify what the theft is, where it's happening. We've now moved to using technology whereby you can self-checkout at retail checkouts at Coles and Woolworths, Bunnings, and a whole lot of people have got it. Now, the big issue is, and I'll use an example, you might be actually in the supermarket, you might be buying a kilo of carrots and a kilo of mince. If you put the mince in and scan the kilo of carrots twice and nobody sees you do it, all of a sudden an $8 product or a $9 product went out the door instead of a $2 product. So there's retail theft happening both in dollar terms and in actual cost of goods. So I think we, as an industry, we've got to get to understand where the retail theft is happening, and then we've got to put in place, and we've got to look at what's happening overseas. We've got to look at what we're doing internally here. Some areas in Australia, if you took card data theft, coming back to that point, we have got much stronger protocols here in Australia. I'm not so sure that we're as good when it comes to goods being taken out of the store and the theft that happens there. I think the big important part about any theft, and let's again talk about those goods going out the door, is somebody's paying for it, and somebody is the consumer. So if your friends or you know somebody who's actually stealing something through the shop, no matter what way it's being done, someone's paying for it. Even if the theft isn't happening and you've put a security guard out in the front like some stores do, there's a cost to the retailer. The retailer can't absorb all those costs, so what do? They hand that cost back to the consumer who walks in the door. Well, look, our position is that we need to work with industry and we need to inform industry. So as one, we need to inform them. We need to protect industry to make sure that retailers have the tools and the wherewithal to in actual fact ensure that they've got the very best. I don't think you'll ever eliminate fraud altogether. I don't think you'll ever eliminate theft out of retail stores altogether. But what we've got to do is to give retailers the very best tools to protect them. And part of our role as an industry body is also to educate them, and we educate them by using conferences like this. We educate them by ensuring that they understand through media what the cost involved is, how much theft is happening at the retail stores. And look, as I said earlier, it'll depend upon where you are. If you're a shoe shop and you only got one shoe out on the display all the time, well, obviously your theft is not going to be as high as if you've got a supermarket where people can put something in, or maybe even a dress store where someone can quietly slip in, the necklace or the accessories and walk out without it being caught. And I guess again, if you're going to be in retail stores, you've got to factor in the cost of what that might be. So if you're going to put those electronic gates up, if you're going to have those little die things that when you pull them off the product, they go all over the product and render the product useless, you might catch the thief, but then you might have a product that's rendered useless. That's no use to you either. So, from an education point of view, we need to educate retailers, and as I said, it's through conferences like we're holding that we're able to educate retailers. Well, look, obviously if you educate retailers and if you give them the tools that they can use, then they can eliminate or reduce their theft. And if you can reduce the cost of doing business, then obviously you've either got two options. You can actually reduce the price of your goods, or your shareholders become more happy because obviously you've got a better result on the bottom line. But I think it goes even a little bit further than that. If we could eliminate 3% of the theft that happens in retail businesses, if you just took that for a moment, that could mean that the retailers could spend another 3% on their retail staff. That would mean that there'd be greater service at the retail counters. That would produce more sales, and that again would be good for the industry. So, it'd be a win-win for everybody, but I think what we've got to do is to try and eliminate costs and then actually be able to employ more people in the industry, and that's what the industry actually needs.